All right, Shona Elliott, thank you for being on the show today. I'm excited to reconnect with you here.
Oh, same here, Sean. Thanks so much. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, you bet, you bet. So you were one of the crazy people like me who decided to publish a book this year,
Yeah.
right?
Who would have thought that we would know all that we know now in terms of what's happening in 2020?
Yeah, so your new book, Create Value as a Senior Leader, how's that going? I think it's been out since March, is that right?
Yeah, my publishing path is a bit different than most authors. So with my publisher, we released the Amazon, I released the book on Amazon in March, and I'm currently going through print publication now. So I'll have print available probably later this year and available in bookstores April of 2021. The cycle for bookstore placement is always much longer, which is why I think authors are just going through the Amazon path these days, or through
Sure.
some type of indie publisher. And then I'll have audio available, I believe, January as well. So it's been interesting because the design allows me to really kind of go heavy with marketing when my book is in bookstores in April. So I have like a couple different campaigns I can do. And with COVID this year, that has been a gift. So it kind of let me have it on Amazon and serve that purpose. And then it will serve different purposes as we hit audio and bookstores in 2021.
Awesome, awesome. So I'm a big fan of creating value, of receiving value. So your title really caught my eye. Can you tell us a little bit about what the book is about, how it came to be?
Sure. So prior to writing a book, I had 15 plus years of senior leadership experience, largely in the healthcare setting. I had my daughter 4.5 years ago, and I tried to kind of do both. I worked remotely during my maternity leave, and I had kind of deal with my board to kind of do a day a week. That turned out to be 20 to 30 hours a week. And I kind of realized by the 6th or 7th month that trying to juggle being a mom, a CEO, a good wife, a sane person, something had to go. So I had the blessing to be able to stay home with Savannah. And I stepped back from my professional career for a few years. And she started preschool last August. And I had the naive thought that, I have all this time on my hands while she's in school. I want to do something with it. So I decided to write a book. An opportunity landed on my lap almost immediately as she started preschool. And I didn't think I was going to write about being a senior leader or senior leadership. I had another idea or two unrelated to my professional career. And as I was writing my book proposal, I just couldn't help but write it about leadership. It was just in me. It was effortless. And as that developed, I realized I had no choice but to write a book on leadership and senior leadership specifically. So my manuscript was finished in January. I wrote it fairly quickly. The book writing process was effortless. It was the editing processes that I think I struggled with more than the writing itself. And the book was published in March. So it was a very quick process. And the book is really around kind of my views, experience, and also what's in the literature and research around the importance of connecting with employees on the front line and as senior leaders seeing the reality of the working conditions your employees are facing every day as they're providing the service or the product to your clients or customers. And I always found in my career as senior leaders, the more you're wrapped up in your senior leadership role and all the busyness with it, you lose your way with respect to the actual reality of what's happening at the front lines. And so being as connected as you can be while being the senior leader, I think served me well during my career. There's many times I was disconnected. And when you're disconnected from the employees and your customers that you're serving, you're making decisions that you're ending up off mark with or off point, and then you're having to clean it up and spending all that energy doing the cleanup. So I learned some interesting lessons all throughout my career in terms of needing to always find ways to plug in with your employees and see everything for yourself. And I say dispelling with management mythology, the stories we tell ourselves in business meetings all the time. You need to fact check what you're hearing and fact check it through employee perspective and employee voice. So that is the essence of my book. And it was fun to write it from the aspect of being able to always know intuitively what works, and then really kind of doing the deep dive on the literature and the research to kind of validate what I've always known. And at some point in my career, I did my PhD for 3 years, doctorate studies on change management and organizational design and leadership. So I had a lot of exposure to kind of the studies and research, but didn't have the time to really integrate that with application. And I was able to do that in the last 3 or 4 months. So it was a real gift for me. I think it was just kind of helpful from a cathartic point of view to write about it, research it, and kind of put it all together. So it was a good process.
That's awesome. So just from hearing you, I can kind of gather assumptions about who the ideal reader might be, but is there a certain size of a business or a certain vertical or industry or in a market that you're targeting with the book?
Not particularly. It is a senior leader. And so I have lots of passion and interest in helping frontline managers, and that might be a future book for me. And certainly frontline managers can read it and take away lots from the book that's helpful for them today. And yet my ideal client or reader for the purposes of this book is a senior leader. Senior leaders shape the culture of an organization, and they do so with every decision and every interaction with an employee. And yet they're not connected necessarily all the time. And yet making decisions, assumptions around their business and how employees are treated without that context. And for me, that's the message I'm really wanting them to hear, that there is value to carve out time in your calendar and schedule to connect with employees, and doing so serves what your ultimate organizational goals are. And so kind of connecting the dots for them along the way. So that is my ideal client. And in terms of sector, I think it's applicable to all sectors. There isn't a single organization that doesn't have employees in it, unless you're an employee of one. And so I think it works for big and small. And I believe even with smaller businesses, as I'm working with a couple of CEOs of smaller businesses, the messages in it are almost even more helpful, because there's a lot more face time, a lot more interaction. And if you're not showing up in ways to really hear employee voice, and if you're in the space of assumptions, thinking because it's a small business, what they're feeling, that does as much damage as not being connected as at all. So I think there's some value to small businesses as well as the big, large organizations and corporations.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's a great point. So I saw on Amazon, you've got some really awesome positive reviews. Yeah. What have you heard from, what kind of feedback have you had since March as far as your readership, and maybe some insights? Like, I know when I published my book earlier this year, I got some feedback that surprised me, in a good way. Like, oh, I didn't see it from that angle, or I didn't realize that part of the book was valuable in any way. So what sort of feedback have you gotten from some of your readers, and what surprised you about that?
So thanks for asking that question. As I went to print publication, I went out to get some advance praise or endorsements for print. And in doing that, having some folks that are big thought leaders on leadership endorse my book in an organic way, and their actual endorsement itself provided me such insight around concepts and who I am that I hadn't had before. So things like around connecting love to leadership and authenticity to leadership are really main themes that resonated to those people who are endorsing my book, and they are in that space. So that was really validating for me. Yeah. And then from readers that have read it, there are just unique things that I had in the book, but didn't think they were salient messages, like practical tips and concepts around doing stay interviews as an example. So a lot of organizations will do exit interviews on the way out to see why the employee left. One of the tools and tactics I provide in the book is doing stay interviews and finding out what's working now and things that you need to focus on to make improvement so they stay in your organization versus, kind of vote with their feet and leave. So I've had some great feedback and some amazing insight into what you do with data from employee engagement surveys, and how to view them and interpret them without judgment and bias, with a notion to seek to understand. So I had the CEO read my book, and he messaged me right away and was like, oh my goodness, the first 5 chapters, I had 3 pages of notes in terms of what I need to be doing to go forward, and can you help me with that? And so I'm happy to do so. So they're just things I wouldn't have anticipated were going to be all that valuable. Things I thought maybe were already known out in the industry, and I'm getting feedback that maybe they are out there already, but I've connected the dots in a applicability way, or maybe the why you need to do this kind of way. So that's been really helpful for me to hear as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it is so helpful, because I think for many of us, like, we have this unconscious competence, right? Things that come very naturally to us because we've been doing them for so long or whatever else. That outside perspective or that outside feedback helps us kind of shine a light on some of those things that are unknown to us, even though we're so close to it. That's probably why, right?
Exactly.
That's really cool. So what have you done, if you don't mind me asking, to market the book? So you published the Kindle version back in March. You've got the print version coming out. Did you say early 2020? April.
Yeah, 2021.
Okay. So did you do any sort of like an advanced reader campaign or a launch team campaign, like anything leading up to the Kindle publication? No. Okay.
So the answer is funny because I had all that available to me, and with my publisher, they set you up with your advanced reader campaign. And I saw some cohort authors that were writing alongside of me do all of that. And my journey in terms of getting to the finish line to upload to Amazon to make it live, it was very different. My daughter, unfortunately, was sick and hospitalized the weekend before we went live. And prior to that, I was almost editing to the finish line. So I kind of made decisions knowing I would be doing a marketing launch for audio and for print. So, you just kind of make decisions. I said, well, I'll build all that out at a later date. And that really has worked well for me through COVID, because my network at the time, since I had only been focused on the book, hadn't been really strong. And my network just coming through COVID without a particular strategy, but just being engaged in some podcasts and some projects with folks has really blossomed. And so now as I do go to print and audio, I have a much richer opportunity to do marketing for those publications and those campaigns. So I know the traditional path and what's recommended. I think I'm unique in the fact that I didn't do that, and it was all good, and have those opportunities with the future campaigns, which I'm looking forward to.
Cool. Yeah. So as an author, outside of your publisher, and does that publisher have an editor, or did you go outside to a third party editing?
Yeah, so my publisher has an editing team within, and so I had at least 3 rounds of editing up to editor-in-chief. And as I went to print, I actually went and got just another edit between those 2 versions just to make it tighter for me. It's all about credibility and voice.
You have a high tolerance for pain, Shona.
I do. And editing is painful. And I didn't realize that. You don't know what you don't know until you go through it. So I'll approach the second book a little differently, having learned some lessons along the way.
Sure.
And yeah, so I just went through another edit. I had the time and the opportunity to do so. And I'm my own ideal reader in a sense. So I want to be able to read something that I feel is as tight and clean as possible. Readers don't have a lot of time, and you want to capture their interest and do it in hopefully as succinct and understandable way as you can.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's where those editors come in handy, because I'm very similar with, as far as I'm my own ideal reader. And like, yes, people say that's such good news. It's like, no, it's not. I have a lot of blind spots.
Yeah, and then
I need some help.
And you can get caught in the weeds in the editing process too. And I wasn't trying to edit to be perfect, just edit to be as clear as I could be.
Sure.
So as I was working out my concepts and writing the book around mindset and reflection and some of the tools that I think really helped me then and today, those are more challenging concepts for me to write about. I get it, live it, breathe it, or try to breathe it and strive towards some of those mindset tools. And writing them in for me was just, I felt a little bit, not clumsy, but it's new writing for me. I can write about leadership, but the more softer skills that support leadership to be the best leader you can, that was challenging. And so on the editing, I was always trying to kind of tighten that up and make that as clean as I could. So I'm not quite sure if I accomplished that in the last edition, but that was the intention.
I'm sure you did with 3 rounds.
You would think, I don't know. Yeah. So the jury will be out in April.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So first of all, where are you from? There's an accent.
Yes, I'm Canadian,
Canadian.
and temporarily a little longer than I thought I would be here in Oklahoma. So my family is in Windsor, Ontario, just across the Detroit, Michigan border. They are all there, and it's been a real challenging year. I have not been able to be present because of COVID, and I'm usually up every 5 to 6 weeks, and I haven't seen my family since Christmas. So we are hoping things clear up. Our big challenge is the Canada has a 14-day self-quarantine requirement for anyone that can come in. So my daughter and I are both dual citizens, like Canadian Americans, so we can travel and cross, but then quarantine for 14 days. And doing that with a 4.5-year-old is not what is ideal for her. But we will see what the end of October brings, and ideally we'll be there at some point before the holidays.
Yeah, that's awesome. Bring your iPad.
I know.
Survival tools, right?
I know. Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, interesting. Cool. Okay. So outside of the publisher and the editor, did you have any other help that's worth talking about as far as support or anything like that outside of the publishing company?
No, within our publisher, they had lots of great tools and content to consume. And for me, it was so good. And it was Difference Press that I worked with. Angela Loria, who's the kind of owner of that publishing firm. She has tons of content and really helpful wisdom. I didn't really need any support in the writing. So the writing came easy. I felt just on the editing that I was struggling, and that I feel is probably an expectation that is different with me than maybe others. So, that's something for me to work through. But the writing was great, and it was just really around being clear as to who your ideal reader is and speak to them, and be really niche around what pain point they were having, and crafting the book in that way. So part of the learning for me was I understood my leadership concepts and knew the importance of them, but what problem was I trying to solve with the ideal reader? Because they don't really know yet, perhaps, what it is they're struggling with and the why behind it. And so having to have that framed out in the beginning with the outline of the book, that took some time, but I felt the support I had available to me through my publisher was really helpful for me to work through that. So my book is really kind of framed from the pain point of, are you seeing lots of your good employees leaving your organization? So retention is a challenge in a lot of organizations, either people leaving your own departments, internal transfers, or leaving altogether. And a lot of leaders don't understand the why. So they just think it's money or other issues, and they don't dive deep into that. And so then when you do, you find a lot of opportunity to have that look different.
Yeah, I feel like retention and culture, right? Just trying to develop a strong culture. It's tough. Like that's kind of one of those softer but hot topics right now, I find.
It is. And people, so you hear leaders talk about, we have a strong culture, and we believe in culture, and okay, those are wonderful statements and thoughts. And how do you really understand what your culture is? How
do you measure that? Right?
Exactly.
How that intangible thing.
Correct. So, understanding how your employees make decisions and the why they make them, how they interact, those are all elements and outcomes of your culture, good or not so good. And, just saying your culture is strong doesn't really mean it's lived in that same way in your day-to-day interactions from all of your employees and leaders. And so it's hard for senior leaders to really understand that and test that. And there are indicators that help you understand that deeper and better. And one of the indicators I think most leaders know is your retention. They don't understand the multiple layers that really need to be understood to get that true picture of culture. So employee engagement scores are certainly one mechanism, but it's taking a look at all of the things that are important to employees, communication being a really big one. And it's not just doing a video and saying you've communicated with your employees, or you've done, you've written a newsletter or a blog or a memo. That's a one-way communication. How do you know that's effective? How are you getting the input, the questions, the perspectives? How do you get those, sources of information from employees in a one-way kind of communication town hall kind of approach? Right. So in the book, I kind of go through all of the different mechanisms and tools that bi-directional communication could be effective in your organization, most importantly, it's the check-in with employees to see if they've heard your message. So you could have even bi-directional communication channels available, and yet for some reason your employees haven't really heard or understood the message you're trying to convey. So how do you know that? You have to go back and check with them and find out if what you're saying and doing is actually effective. And so there's many different layers to it. And I go through that in my book, and you pick one or two that are your hottest pain points and focus on those. You can't implement everything, and that isn't the intention, but it's looking through your organizational data and information and really getting a sense as to kind of where your priorities need to be to address the hot spots that you have.
Cool. So in your experience as it relates to retention issues or culture or communication breakdowns or some of these issues that your book is addressing, like what's the biggest obstacle? What's the biggest challenge or the common issue that you see going on within these organizations?
I think it's the biggest one I see is the CEO or senior leader not understanding how their employees are feeling at all. They're just disconnected. So I did feeling.
What does feeling have to do with it?
I know, exactly. I mean, we're all humans working together, trying to get through this life, and you need to treat your employees as such. And that sounds so easy and simple, and yet it isn't. And I think a lot of senior leaders make assumptions, and I'm sure I did too throughout my career, that everything is fine, everything's good, and I don't have an ability to kind of check in with that. And so I did an assertive, for me, I do your post on LinkedIn last week. I have someone from Gary Vaynerchuk's team, Gary V's team, on the side doing some side work with me and on LinkedIn, and he told me, we're going to do an experiment. Whatever you just kind of mentioned around the need for senior leaders to be connected, we're going to, in employee voice on LinkedIn, we're going to put that in a post, and you're going to post it. And I was uncomfortable, to say the least. I hadn't whipped out a post in 5 minutes ever in my life, and to do that on something I hadn't really thought through and felt passionate about was a little nerve-wracking for me. And so, I posted it, and the intention was to really say, there's a lot of leaders on LinkedIn having these big platitudes of, we believe in employee engagement and employee voice or culture or whatever it is. And yet I know in some of those organizations, the employees are feeling very different. And so how do you incorporate what you're hearing from employees into your post and talk about it and address it? Because those employees who are seeing those platitudes on LinkedIn are the ones that are on LinkedIn looking for another job because they don't feel that is the environment that they're working in. And so there's a big disconnect. So I got some really interesting engagement and some interesting perspectives on that, where employees do want to be heard and want to have a voice. LinkedIn is not that platform for them because they can't say anything with their name and title attached to it without fear of being fired or repercussions. And so how do we connect the two, and how do senior leaders really understand there's a different perspective out there that they need to pay attention to and course correct and be open to that? And I think with some senior leaders, there's a fear to leave the office. There's been a lot of fear since COVID related to many factors. And if your organization didn't respond well or prepare well or didn't communicate well, there's a fear to face that on the front line. And sure. I understand that that's a human emotion. And yet staying in the office disconnected isn't the answer either. And so I think there are safe ways that you can bring people together and do the honoring of listening to employees' views and perspectives as part of their moving forward as well. And you hearing that helps shift your perspective as to what could be done differently in the future.
Yeah, I love that. So at a very early age, and I don't remember who this was, and I was probably a teenager, but somewhere I saw like a metaphor for a business, and it was a tree. And I've seen it again. I mean, this isn't anything new, but it was a tree, and on the branches you had all the fruit, the sales, the marketing, the leads, the profits, the revenue, all the fruit that the business was, bared at the time. And underneath that you had all the roots, and everything that you're talking about to me is some of the softer skills, the relationship skills, the emotional intelligence capabilities within senior leadership. Like, to me, that's all strengthening the roots And if you strengthen the roots, you'll bear better fruit, right? So I love, everything that we're talking about. And I think that's so important, especially now with everything going on.
I agree. And it's easier to prune the tree than to have to dig the roots out and see what's going on. That's a harder path. It is easier for us senior leaders. I know, because I've been in the senior leadership shoes for many years. It's easier to attend to kind of the surface of the tree or surface problems and deal with marketing or deal with whatever the projects are. It's easier. You feel like you're accomplishing something. There's a check mark you can put in the box, so you've provided value that day. And that isn't the same when you're trying to navigate through what's happening at the front lines. And it's
right.
harder and it's more uncomfortable. It feels like it takes more time. It will bring up issues that now you have to address because you've heard them. And there's just so much there. So I think it's easier for us to just kind of deal with the funner things, so to speak, that give us more of an easy reward of, yes, I can check the box and I got that done. And in some organizations, that's what senior leaders are motivated towards. So they're not incentivized really to understand the reality at the front line. They're incentivized to add value to to their share price, or they're incentivized for their bonuses for increased market share or increased revenue. So it's really understanding those drivers, and yet it's your employee base that will deliver on all those goals. So if you want to deliver on X, Y, and Z set from your board or in your bonus, you can't do that without the conditions at the front lines being addressed so that they can do their best work in the best conditions possible. So it's kind of connecting those dots for senior leaders because it is sometimes overwhelming to think, how am I going to continue to engage employees in front of decisions versus just telling them how it's going to be, and how am I going to engage with them and understand them and spend time with them. And I think a lot of the most successful leaders and organizations have found that path and figured out that's where their work is, and that is what they need to do. And so I'm just here to kind of advocate for that as well, based on my own experience of getting it right, and then sometimes not so much.
Yeah.
And from that, and then backing that up with a lot of research and studies that validate that that is indeed the case.
Yeah, that's cool. I think it's a tough shift though, right? Because a lot of us are used to these quick wins, short-term gains, just survive and, bear better fruit with more fruit. We need more sales, get more leads, whatever it might be. So just quick win after quick win, which is very costly, I find, especially when you're talking about marketing. And it's just a different way of approaching everything to, get behind that, go underneath it, get to the roots of some of these issues to solve for the long term when there's all that pressure to quota or stop, share, whatever it might be. So I'd imagine it's a very difficult shift if you've been in that short-term fix and quick win behavior for months, years, decades, whatever.
Like, depends on the leader's journey. That may be all they've been exposed to. And I'm really passionate about setting the expectations from the top, from the board levels. So unfortunately, in a few organizations I've worked at, the dysfunction and toxic cultures started at the board level. And so the board makes decisions, sets expectations for the CEO, and that dictates how the CEO is going to show up and expect things from their senior leadership team. It's what they're going to be focused on. So it's really understanding at the board level how they make decisions on priorities, how they incentivize the CEO, what goals they set for him, and understand the implications of what that is for the front line. And not a lot of boards are really equipped with the knowledge of employee engagement, employee retention, all of the research. So the CEO is going to have to bring in some of those resources for the board so they understand it's just not about shareholder price. It's not about what the profit and losses are. It is a bigger picture. So there's a lot of education that has to happen there as well.
Yeah, it makes sense. A lot of what you're talking about reminds me of many years ago, I read a book called The Call to the Customer. And one of the big takeaways that I still remember today is the author was really drilling into the reader that your employees are your best customers.
Absolutely.
Right? So it kind of starts there. You have to treat your employees like they are the best, most valued customers in the world, because it's what they are.
Yes.
And if they're treated with respect and treated well, they're going to just simply turn around, role model that behavior right out to the public.
For sure. And the example I've been mentioning lately, it's come up in a few other conversations, is it's like asking your nurses and physicians to provide loving, compassionate care at the bedside. When they leave the patient room, it is chaos, dysfunction, toxicity.
Right.
They're fearful. They don't understand what's happening. They have no knowledge of decisions being made that impact them. So they have to live that and yet interface with patients who need their compassion and their patience as they're going through some really challenging times with their health at that point. So like, how do you expect to have compassionate care and hit all of your goals related to patient and family-centered care that you and the board set when they're working in chaos, without supplies they need, without trusting the organization has their back or is caring about them as they care for patients? Like it doesn't really line up to how that could even be possible. So
I love that analogy.
Is, maybe an example to help understand why employees are critical, to build them into all of your decision making in terms of decisions that impact them, and let them have a voice. They see it, live it, experience it. They need to be part of that framework. And the complexity is how do you do that in big organizations? And how, when you're busy yourself as a senior leader, how do you do that? And that's the mindset shift that you're kind of alluding to. When you've always operated and led in a certain way, to have to open your mind up to the possibility that this is the only way to really achieve what you're hoping to from an organizational goal and strategy perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of it's behavior change.
Mm-hmm.
We both know is difficult, can be difficult, right?
Yes, absolutely. We live it every day, always trying to improve.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about beyond the book here. So the book came out, it's done really well. You got some great reviews. Thanks for sharing all of that insight. That's so valuable. So let's talk about your business.
Yes.
I'm assuming that the book supports the business model, but I don't want to make any assumptions. So, do we lose you?
Oh, back.
There we go.
Technical difficulties.
Okay, so are you back? You good?
I'm back.
Okay, cross our fingers, right? So I'm assuming the book supports the business model. Is that right? So tell me a little bit about your business.
Yeah, again, I think I'm unique with my path. I had planned, since I wrote the book and started this path with Savannah being in school last August. I had the naive assumption that March 13th, the day after my book dropped on Amazon, I would work out the structural components of the business. I had, done enough where I had a website up. I knew generally what kind of offering I wanted to be providing. And so with COVID, Savannah became homeschooled. And so my priority is Savannah. And that's why I kind of went on this path, is to be able to be with her and present and not working my 80-hour work weeks away from the home. And so I'm kind of like, wow, the first couple of weeks with COVID and her at homeschool, and I supposed to be marketing and doing all this stuff, that created a lot of tension inside me to be able to wrestle with that. And I'm in a mentorship group with Marianne Williamson, and I was talking with her about that in April, and she gave me advice that reminded me of what I already knew. It's all in God's timing, or in the universe's timing, whatever you ascribe to. And what will be. My main priority is Savannah, and let the rest of the frenetic energy to get stuff done, let it go. And I'm so grateful for that reminder, because that has been the success of my career. Everything is lined up through, I believe, God or universe's hands. And when I try to go after it, it's never as amazing or beautiful as when it just kind of lines up itself. So with letting that go, as the universe and God provides, amazing things have opened up, not aligned in any type of strategy that would be best practice or I would recommend for an entrepreneur. And yet I've been able to help and provide service to senior leaders that are in need, some teams that have needed help. I'm just about to complete the design and writing of a graduate level course in healthcare leadership for University of Ontario, which is, I would never have anticipated that. And I'm being pulled into all these new spaces around emotional intelligence and our future from a technology perspective that I hadn't anticipated. Some interesting and magical doors have opened there. and really looking at female leadership in the founding and funding area. So as there are angel investors out there and a lot of groups that are funding female founders, and we have female founders who typically haven't been funded in the past. I think it's only 2.8 or 9% of all funding goes to women. I think that's going to change really quickly. Yeah, I didn't realize that myself. And I see now and have had the blessing to interact with some amazing, generous female funders. And I think that statistics is going to change quickly in the right direction. But there's some interesting leadership pieces. So for anyone who's a founder of their own business and is trying to secure funding from funders, there's this interesting dynamic in the choosing of that individual. Most entrepreneurs want funding any way they can get it. And so you usually have to get it with an equity partner if the model is designed that way. And so you just take what you can get. And if you feel the equity share is something you can live with, you take it. And you don't really understand as a founder what that funder is going to do in your organization. So are they hands-on, and is their values and integrity and their why of funding aligned with yours as the founder? And how do you understand that, assess that, and build that into your selection process? And how do funders, as they try to get their networks built out, support that knowledge with the funders themselves? Why are funders funding? Is it driven from a place of wanting to help, or ROI, power, because you can support people? Like, what's the real why there? And kind of understanding that and aligning it. So there's some interesting leadership elements that I've gotten pulled into this summer that's been really fascinating. And all that should line up at some point to a strategy and a niche. Savannah just started back school a few weeks ago. I have a bit more capacity, but she's kind of been in and out of school with some health problems. So every time I think I got to step forward, I have a new mindset challenge to work through with her being home and figuring.
Just summon Marianne's guidance. Right?
Exactly. It's in my head all the time, and just go with the flow. It will be what it is. And the doors that have opened up for me, I couldn't work 80 hours a week and open those up myself. So it's not me putting me in these positions. I think there's a greater purpose to be served, and curious to see where it all goes. And in the meantime, just helping out where I'm called to help out, and just providing my expertise and research and a shift in perspective to get senior leaders and organizations where they need to be.
Good for you. I love the way you're approaching all this. I mean, I think at times I have, if I have a plan in place and I'm goal driven and all the rest of it, and I get into one of those modes, like I get really frustrated, right? So I give you so much credit, because there are so many outside external factors at play here with your situation, with all of our situations. And I think you've got such a good attitude and such a good mindset about it, that you're just calm, cool, and collected and going with the flow. I think one of my biggest mentors, Wayne Dyer, always used to say, infinite patience delivers immediate results.
Absolutely.
So I just think it's so important to remain patient and just have the right outlook on it, which is so neat. Dropped her. That was a big deal, but you just nonchalantly said you were working with Marianne Williamson. I mean, that is so cool. I want to geek out about that now.
Yeah, it's again kind of God's or universe's hand at play. As I published my book, our publisher had a working relationship with Marianne, and she's been a big fan of Marianne's for a long time. And as Marianne stepped down from the Democratic campaign, she was looking for what to do next. And so they struck up the opportunity for the first time for Marianne to take on some mentors in the author space. So Marianne's written 12 or 13 books and is quite active on the social media platforms with her voice and what she's wanting to change in the world. And so there's a group of, I think, 19 or 20 authors that from April to the end of December, I think we're going to extend it because COVID has altered some of our in-person events. So I think we'll probably go into March. We've just been able to meet with her every 2 weeks and talk about, what it means to be an author. How do we write? How do we write in a voice that's authentic to ourselves? And how do we work through that process?
So cool.
It's really amazing. She's and just an incredible lady. I've had an opportunity to speak with her one-on-one for a great length of time. And just her alignment with faith and in God and her journey from a spirituality perspective is just amazing. And she's open and candid and shares what worked well for her and where she was off path and where she struggled and continues to as a human. And there's huge value in that. And the network of other authors and a few of them in the leadership space has been wonderful as well. So we can talk about leadership or whatever we need to talk about through the lens of leadership and from what we're learning as a collective together with Marianne.
That's so neat. That's awesome. So helpful too, to be a part of a mastermind. And I think we both put 2 and 2 together last week. Dr. J.J. Kelly, who was a guest on the show a few weeks ago, is actually in that group with you.
Right? Yes, she is. Yeah, she just has this great energy about her. She is her own person, and she embraces it. And I admire that. She is an inspiration, living who she is in her interactions. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I emailed her. I gave her a hard time because when you told me that she was in the mastermind, I'm like, you withheld information. You didn't tell me you were with Marianne every 2 weeks, Yeah.
So cool. It's a huge gift, and it's an amazing, it's kind of like a sisterhood in a lot of ways.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Going back a few minutes, I love what you just were talking about as far as funding is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
Because so my sister was recently on Shark Tank.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. I think it was in Vegas. LA is just in really bad shape right now, and everyone had to fly to Vegas, and I think they quarantined for a while. But she was on Shark Tank. She can't tell I'm trying to get everything I can out of her. Like, what was the outcome? But she's keeping a secret for now. And it is amazing because I talked to her before she went on, and it was all speculative. Here are the sharks. Here's who's going to be there on this season. And if so-and-so gave me a deal, I got to think through this. And if so-and-so did a deal, I got to, because if you're going on that show, or if you're anyone looking for outside funding, those are some questions, like some seriously important and probably difficult questions. Half of them you don't know yet.
Yes.
That's a process you need to go through, because what a bad mistake you can make if you partner up with, someone who isn't aligned with where you want to take things, or, you know what I mean? So I love that you're into that. It's such a unique niche almost.
It is. And I'm not sure how I will build all of that out, but I've had a number of interesting conversations, and I've had, a few folks I've been able to support in that space. And it's so critical because founders are just desperate for any capital that they can raise. And so that's your only kind of driver. You're not, and how much equity they'll take if they're going to fund you. So those are kind of the two lenses you're looking through, and you're kind of blind to the rest of it because you need money and you have a great idea and you want to survive. So understanding that in a deeper way from a founder perspective. And I think there's some ownership on the funder side. I had an interesting conversation with an incredible female funder, and she's been a founder as well. And we talked that through a little bit in terms of, how funders show up in their leadership style, what they look for in their approach, and how do you assess both things. So it's like it's a relationship. And so building all that into these pitch summits, I think is really critical. So she's hosting her pitch summit in May, her first one for female founders in San Diego. And I did a podcast interview with her yesterday, and we had a lot of interesting conversations on the front and back end as to how that could, look and be built out. And she gets it. She's an amazing people person, understands the value of connection with employees and understanding their why at the workplace. And she's all about seeing things herself, very visual. And so she gets it intuitively. Like, I wouldn't have any questions with her in that space, but yet I hear horror stories of other founders really wasting years because they've gotten bad advice, bad direction, bad coaching, and in a way that the relationship didn't allow them to push back and say, hey, I hear where you're coming from, understand the bigger context, and let's try to figure this out together. Kind of felt intimidated. They didn't want to risk the relationship, don't want to risk the capital. They had the imposter syndrome, like, I don't know anything. They know everything. They've been successful, which are all natural. And it's the unpacking of that. So I think there's so much focus on what the ROI is going to be, the valuation of the company, terminal value, when do people want to exit. Like, there's so much focus on all of those things, the revenue stream, and your capacity to live up to that. All important elements, and yet this relationship piece, in my view, is the single most important factor to really determine success. And on the funder side, it's really understanding the leadership setup, depending on how early stage the startup is. So it's it's been around for a year. Who are the key players at the leadership table? A lot of times it is, a couple friends over drinks one night, saying, hey, we got a great idea. All of a sudden that unravels to them leading the organization. And are they the right people, or are the values aligned? And, we all know about kind of fit for culture in organizations. And that is as key as ever at the startup. And usually startup doesn't happen by saying, hey, are you a fit for the culture of an organization we haven't started yet?
Right.
So how do you assess that? And then, you're 6 months in, you've both invested your own money, you kind of bootstrapped it. And no one's really kind of talked about that cultural elements and any new hires that come on, how do they fit in? So you don't think of that, employee number 3. I'm sure Facebook, when they were on employee number 3, gave that a lot of thought. So that's how startups start, a couple of aligned people, great ideas, energetic, want to work together. And that's key for the beginning, but how does that serve you in the long run to be sustainable? And so funders and founders both need to understand that. And I haven't done in-depth research yet, but I've done enough research to know there's not a lot of people really talking about that important element. There's a lot of literature on valuation and equity, share, and all of that, but not in the softer stuff.
Wow. Yeah, it's almost like matchmaking.
It is.
Right? Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, and not on the finances. You couldn't imagine, you shouldn't in a relationship be looking at how much are you worth and how much are you going to give me for that worth. It's about fit and relationship and the ability to show up as yourselves for your own dreams and wishes, and being transparent about that right from the beginning to kind of have a relationship that is going to be successful and sustainable.
Yeah, I love that. All right, so if we want to buy your book, Shona, or find you online, where can people go?
Sure. My book's on Amazon and the link is on my website. So if you go to Shona Elliott, ShonaElliott.org, you'll find my information there. My social handles are connected there. I'm only really active at the moment on LinkedIn, and I will eventually, with a bit of capacity, build out my social media postings on the platforms. But right now, if you do want to find me in an active space, LinkedIn has been my go-to place. So that'll look different soon enough, but my website has all my information and you can get a copy of my book through there. And I've also offered strategy sessions for folks that want to kind of talk about challenges, and I can provide some support that way as well.
Awesome. Cool. So based on our conversation here today, what is one piece of wisdom you can bestow on our listeners and viewers today?
I think it's the theme of our discussion, which is employees are human and need to be thought of as such. And as a senior leader, it's honoring that, acknowledging that, and connecting with that as a human yourself, not wearing your suit or your CEO title. And I think as senior leaders can find a way every day to keep that in the forefront of their minds, their organizations will be better served as a result of that.
Love it. Well, thank you. Thanks for being on the show today, Shona.
Thank you for what you're doing. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. All right. Well, be in touch soon.
We will. Thanks so much.
Okay. Thanks.